looking up some quotes. Maya Angelou said, "You can't use up creativity. The more you use, the more you have."
Oh yeah,
So
absolutely.
it's almost getting into, and again, it's practicing that art. And used to have a friend who would give himself an hour a day to just sit down and come up with new things. And you know um, uh,
Oh wow, that's
and
great. So
that
like we
was I,
block out,
I
he'd
think
block it
block out
out.
time for creative thinking where you're not like worried about what the next meeting is going to be or that sort of thing, and let your mind wander. And then the other thing is also, I know for me, perfectionism can often stand in the way of creativity because like the first draft is always going to be but at least it's a first draft, and being able to get over your unwillingness to put out something that's imperfect, is often the way to at least get something new, that okay, it's gonna start out meh, and then over time it's gonna get better.
So that makes sense to me that the people who do some of their own original thinking first and then use AI as a tool to kind of flesh it out or catalyze further ideas, I think makes a lot of sense. Just a few things came to me when you were talking there as like some good tips for how people can think about stuff to be more creative. Ultimately we want to become creative geniuses, and I think, frankly, it's going to be necessary to survive in the modern world. But throughout life, I think it's important, and throughout your productive life, you want to learn, unlearn, and relearn. So learn, you need to have a basis of knowledge or how to do things, and all that comes from that. But then as new facts present themselves and systems and environments change, you need to unlearn some things. You need to realize, okay, that's no longer valid, or perhaps I've learned now what I thought was correct before is not correct. So unlearn it, throw it out, be willing to adapt again, have this idea that you need to change your thinking. Some people are extremely rigid. Does food have a role here? There's a left turn. Um, So can you be more or less creative depending upon what you eat and what you like? Are there any real lessons in reality for how we deal with AI and become more
Well,
creative?
I think getting one element of creativity is sort of the willingness to embrace kind of new and different ideas, and if that means maybe getting outside of your typical routine, and trying something new, or even trying a new recipe.
Right.
Sometimes that's a way to go about it, and oftentimes even making food can be quite a creative experience.
Oh, I love
Um,
it. I
and
love to cook.
yeah,
And it's
yeah.
so much about the end result of the food. Here's why I love cooking, and I totally encourage people, and I agree with what you said, why you should cook is I almost never read from a recipe. So it's a very creative thing. I deal with what I have in the fridge and the cupboard. So necessity is the mother of invention. It forces you to be creative. I try to teach my son this, in the day and age where you can get a recipe just by speaking to your phone. I don't do that. It's like Thanksgiving. Like, it's like, okay, how do I cook a turkey? I need to know how to do that. But yeah, go outside, your routine. You just kind of do that. To be a successful startup, you have to be all like, under 25 and just throw some stuff at them and they'll begin their hustle culture again. That's utter nonsense, and it's been disproven.
Mhm.
Actually, the most successful companies are started by people who are like over 45. But I would argue again, even more successful will be a mixture of young and old, from the true important importance of diversity, right? Not to
Yes.
get the DEI stuff per se, because like I'm also a believer in meritocracy, but I do think drawing inspiration from a variety of different sources, and people have differing experiences and they can come from things in different
Yes.
angles, that will catalyze a lot of genius thinking. So hang out with young people, especially children, because children have not become, they've not
Hmm.
absorbed all these rules yet. Like they color outside the lines. You said think outside of the box. Well, I like to think outside of the triangle. Why even a box? Fuck, why is it think outside of the box? Think
Yeah.
outside of the spirit. hello, good morning, good day, mate, high octane friends, mates, wherever you may be in time or space. If you are just joining in from Mars, you might find a little bit of a bandwidth delay there. But welcome, Elon. You know, in the future. Because that's where we really would. I know, speaking personally, that's where I would like you to be.
Well, didn't you hear Jane Goodall did an interview that was only published after her death, and she was like, "Yeah, no, they should all get on a ship and go out." To
Yeah.
Mars.
Well, okay, good on her. So good on Goodall. See, so she was living up to her name. Yeah, that's very unfortunate that she's gone. But she was 91, wasn't she?
Mm-hmm. No, she was fairly old. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. What a terrific trailblazer, and very courageous to go out to, was it like Uganda or Tanzania, like that?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
She was like 17 or 18 years old or something like that, really young. And to work, I think she worked with Louis Leakey, like a really famous apologist, right?
Yeah.
Okay, folks, today we are going to talk about becoming, how to become a creative genius. And this is a big topic, and we're going to talk about why this is really important. One of the reasons why it's important is now, because of the increase of automation, particularly with regard to information and ideas, almost, or quasi ideas through AI. We are going to be increasingly competing with these bots, if you will. And so what does that mean for humans? So, one of the important things that we'll need to optimize to remain competitive is, how can you unleash your inner genius? And I believe it's kind of like strength. If you're forced into a situation where you absolutely must show your strength, for example, if your child were trapped under a car, you will find the strength. And I think this is one way to look at problems. I'm a big believer in the idea that necessity is the mother of invention. And we have seen this time and time again in Silicon Valley, several years ago, certainly, when venture capital was flowing, and a lot of companies were not at all short of investment funds, and yet that makes your thinking flabby, right? Because people, what they tend to default, and I've been in a tech startup like this where, I think at one point we were spending $80,000 a week on Facebook ads. Like, that's a significant budget, and some people way more. But it is not. It doesn't necessarily yield the best results. Mm-hmm. And if you look at military, there are other examples. Ukraine is way outclassed in terms of military equipment and money in their war against the terrible Russians. But look, they have not taken Ukraine, and I don't think they will either. And so they've been forced to be creative, and more is often less in terms of results. So I think, again, necessity is the mother of invention, but we're going to talk about how to be more creative. And again, if you get one idea, audience member, from this podcast, that's a gem, and it's useful to you, I think we will have done our jobs, right, Trevor?
Yeah, for sure. No, I think it's absolutely, and there's so much to creativity, and I think it's often difficult to, especially I think when you're in it, like I think the people that are most insecure about their own creativity are artists and people that are doing this sort of professionally, and I mean, the challenge is that sometimes it's just you need to adapt to when those creative bursts kind of happen, and not the other way around sometimes, like that it's not that you can just sit down at your computer in front of a blank screen and say, okay, time to be creative now, because that's almost certainly the surefire way to sort of drive any creative aspects away from you. And kind of writer's block is a real thing, where you can get stuck. And so I think, and you often hear of, or you think of these things where the most creative. Sometimes you'll come up with an idea, even just like in the shower, and why does that happen? Well, it's because your mind is off of actively working on stuff, but then that gives your sort of subconscious kind of time to ruminate on what you were doing, and that's often where some of the most creative ideas can come from. Is from taking a break, taking a walk, doing something else if you're feeling stuck, as a way of kind of helping you to unblock the creativity and get yourself engaged a bit more. So
Yeah,
yeah.
and I would add a couple of things to that. One is like since we were talking earlier about AI, the continued growth and proliferation of that, and how that behooves us all to become more creative. I think it's not necessarily just an us versus them kind of scenario. Like, to be more creative, you can also use AI to stimulate some of your thinking. So I think that using the technology, it seems counterintuitive, almost ironic, but to become more human and more creative, you can use technology. You can't
Mm-hmm.
really force creativity. It doesn't work very easily. I mean, you talked about writer's block. You can't force it, although I would say that action begets action, which begets
Yes.
being creative. So just getting started, like if you're a writer, just write something down.
Yep.
Stop overthinking, and sometimes pre-thinking is bad because you're importing into your mind all those systems and rules and everything. And
Yep.
if you think back to some of the most creative geniuses who did things very differently, I'm thinking of immediately painter Salvador Dali, who's one of my favorites, and
Mm-hmm.
wild people who lived way outside the rules. And so you have to suspend reality and the rules. So how do you do that? But
Right.
getting started is a big thing.
Mm-hmm.
You talked about adaptability. How do you become more adaptable, you think? Because I think we all need to be more adaptable because change is accelerating.
Yeah. 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 Um, I think embracing the unknown rather than fearing it is one kind of option. I think again, going back to mindset. Having a mindset that you're excited. At least even psyching yourself up to be excited about the day ahead, rather than worried about all of the things that are in front of you. Might be a good way. This is almost me. I should listen to my own advice, because I think
We always
that's how
do.
I woke up today. Was like, oh my god, I've got all of these things. But
Yeah.
but yeah,
Or I suppose you could go the Timothy Leary route. The Timothy Leary was a famous guy in the 60s and 70s, a Harvard prof. I don't even remember what subject he ostensibly was teaching.
hmm
But I think he did art and all sorts of things. But he was famous for tune in, turn on, drop out. I think that's very important from the perspective of getting things done, being innovative, being creative, being inventive. Um, and you kind of have to pull back. Sometimes you need to break and bend rules. I'm not
yes,
advocating being cruel to anybody or any community. I don't think that is anything that you want to do ever. Um, but yeah, it is a kind of tune in, turn on, drop out. And I would kind of reverse the order on Leary. I would say kind of drop out, at least temporarily, from that crushing. There's a lot of propriety, if you will, uh, in society increasingly. And perhaps this is because everyone can be a commentator in the age of social media. So anything you say, even if it's absolutely brilliant, it's useful to know that you're going to get blowback anyway, right?
yes,
So
yes,
try to
yes.
be a little fearless, do it anyway. Timothy Leary also went the route of, like, he was famous for taking psychedelics like LSD and psilocybin, like magic mushrooms and stuff. And there are lots of cases of artists, musical artists, for example, who do that, have done that. David Bowie had done that at one point. And there's a guy who kept on reinventing himself. A
hmm
willingness to change, I think, is foundational if you want to be
Yes.
creative, genius. Yeah.
Yeah, 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 yeah. No, willingness to change, and willingness to embrace the unknown, and be comfortable, kind of not knowing, and let the answers come to you. I think I mean, I was just looking up some quotes. Maya Angelou said, "You can't use up creativity. The more you use, the more you have."
Oh yeah,
So
absolutely.
it's almost getting into, and again, it's practicing that art. And used to have a friend who would give himself an hour a day to just sit down and come up with new things, and you know um, uh,
Oh wow, that's
and
great. So
that
like we
was I,
block out,
I
he'd
think
block it
block out
out.
time for creative thinking where you're not like worried about what the next meeting is going to be or that sort of thing, and let your mind wander. And then the other thing is also, I know for me, perfectionism can often stand in the way of creativity, because like the first draft is always going to be but at least it's a first draft, and being able to get over your unwillingness to put out something that's imperfect, is often the way to at least get something new, that okay, it's gonna start out meh, and then over time it's gonna get better.
Yeah,
So
you made me think. To finish, you need to start.
yes,
You
yes,
know?
yes. And
Um,
yeah, there was another quote: "Make more bad stuff. That's the path to good stuff," by Austin Kleon and Show Your Work. So
yeah,
yeah,
interesting.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
this perfectionism is absolutely problematic. There are areas and industries where we want to ultimately aim for perfect. But you don't have to start out that way.
Well, this is just it. Like you can utilize those tendencies after you've got the initial draft out to sort of improve it.
Yeah.
But you need to sort of suspend. I think I had a friend who was very good at just kind of like, why don't we suspend all of our preconceptions about the world, and let's just step into kind of a creative space where any idea, no matter how zany it sounds, is worthy of at least being mentioned, and then we can kind of iterate on it. And I think his approach was somewhat, I liked it. He called it sort of jamming, in the sense of almost a jazz musician group getting together and throwing ideas up and seeing what sticks, and then iterating off of that. Well, what if we did this instead of that? And I think that was a very interesting window into the creative process that I hadn't sort of experienced before, where I think I have a lot more of a loud voice in my head that tells me that, like, that's not coming out well, you need to adjust that, you need to make it better. But that sort of critical voice, critical eye, is actually a barrier to brainstorming. And I mean, like, a lot of times in corporate, like, brainstorming sessions, they'll try to say, like, throw out any idea. Any idea is a good one. Let's get something on the table. And oftentimes, I think even in research, what I've found is that the people who are kind of new to the area can often come up with these new ideas or new approaches that maybe it's something that I'd thought of before, but I'd sort of oh well, I don't think that's necessarily that useful. But even just voicing that new idea caused other people to sort of think about it and then say, well, no, but this element of that might have some merit, and so then you're sort of gradually crawling up this ladder from sort of a starting point into something that's a bit more clear. One of the things about AI, though, that there was actually a recent MIT study that where they looked at brain scans of people that either used AI first and then sort of tried to adapt and change it, versus people that, like, wrote down their ideas first and then used the AI. Was that there was a deficit so the people that came up with their own ideas and then used the AI kind of got further than the people that used the AI first, because the problem there is that your mind sort of gets set by those initial sort of ideas that the AI brings up, which may or may not be that, you know, innovative or new. They're just sort of, again, rehashed from, you know, the usual way large language models, like they're coming up
AI
with something
doesn't
that fits
actually create new stuff, does it? Not really.
yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah, I
It can,
wanted
I
to,
mean, AI is great at sort of telling you, you know, fleshing out sort of an idea that you might give it first, but it's not, you know, when you ask it to come up with something new. Okay, yeah, it'll give you some examples, but the I think it's your looking at those examples and picking the one that is the best representation, is the best way to sort of get that's your creative process, you know, reviewing those from either an aesthetic perspective, if it's a picture, or, you know, from sort of a writing analysis perspective. But basically the deficit that was, you know, the deficit that came from having your own ideas, people ended up with more, you know, kind of a more broad variety of ideas when they wrote things down first and then had the AI sort of iterate off of that, than when they didn't. And then those people never really caught up, even if they did more of their own. So it's
yeah,
definitely, you know, it's definitely, I think you want to, again, you want to take the first stab at it, and then use whatever the AI's you know, input is to sort of maybe expand from that into different areas. So,
yeah. I mean,
yeah.
as it stands now, anyway, that kind of AI is it's a tool, and I think you're in the driver's seat. So that makes sense to me that the people who do some of their own original thinking first, and then use AI as a tool to kind of flesh it out or catalyze further ideas, I think makes a lot of sense. You know, just a few things came to me when you were talking there as like some good tips for how people can think about stuff to be more creative. To, you know, ultimately we want to become creative geniuses, and I think frankly it's going to be necessary to survive in the modern world. But throughout life, I think it's important, and throughout your productive life, you want to learn, unlearn, and relearn. So learn, you need to have a basis of knowledge or how to do things, and all that comes from that. But then as new facts present themselves and systems and environments change, you need to unlearn some things. You need to realize, okay, that's no longer valid, or perhaps I've learned now what I thought was correct before is not correct. So unlearn it, throw it out, be willing to adapt again, have this idea that you need to change your thinking. Some people are extremely rigid.
Mm-hmm,
I
mm-hmm.
don't want to delve into the controversy of religion too much here, but I think, you know, people who have certain customs, uh, one category of which, of course, which is religion. I think if you're super rigid about that, you're probably not a creative person, right? And I guess there is some real merit to that. You know, for the record, I'm probably the least religious person you'll ever meet. But you know, I respect people's right to do that stuff. It's just not for me, because that for me is kind of the antithesis of, and for want of a less progressive word, a pejorative word, you know, it's not progressive at all. It's very hard to unlearn something if you're just always thinking the same way. And then the third part of that is, you know, learn, unlearn, relearn. Okay, now learn something new. The other thing that came to me was you talked about like brainstorming, like how you do brainstorming. So I think with regard to creativity, the emphasis in that should be, the brainstorm is composed, of course, of two words, but I think the emphasis should come on the storm. The storm should come first, not the brain. In other words, the
Yeah,
overanalyze
yeah.
things really doesn't make for a very good storm.
Mm-hmm,
Make the storm first, create lots of stuff, throw lots of jello against the wall, and then analyze it afterward. Let's pick out, and you know, collaboratively, this is very helpful.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And the other thing I was thinking of that is like, it's kind of related with regard to ideas. Edit after, not beforehand.
Yes,
And
yes.
I'll give you an example. My wife, who is like, you know, on an IQ, standard IQ test, like fucking light years ahead of me. Like she's actually a genius on the IQ score. I get this. I'm no dummy, but she's ultra bright. But I'm not analytically like at her level. But if I'm anything, I am very much a creative person. And so I'll give you a little example. We don't do this so much anymore, but it used to really irritate me like 10 or 20 years ago. I'm like, okay, a simple mundane thing like, where are we going to go for dinner tonight? It's like, well, let's think about it. And my way would be like, okay, I'm just going to kind of barf out everything. Even though I know that some of these ideas are going to be immediately or later, kind of criticized. It'd be like, okay, well, we could go to Nobu, really fancy restaurant, Canoe. We could go to McDonald's, like all over the map. Mm-hmm. And so, or Jack Astor's, like one of these family things, or Chili's, for example, if you're in the US. And she would just, at every step when I would say this, she would like, no, that's not the right thing. Let's just get all the ideas out first. So I am very much of that mind that you're putting barriers in front. You're not going to get the best result if you're editing before rather than after. So and I think you talked about jazz, like improvisational jazz in particular, right? And the musicians will start out and they'll probably have a lot of crap in there, but that's probably how you come up with genius stuff.
Yeah, and I mean the interesting thing about jazz is that like there are still some rules that you're following, in terms of melodic and sort of rhythm and these kinds of things, but it's sort of knowing when some of those rules can be bent, and knowing when a kind of almost just having that musical sort of talent kind of innately within you as you're participating, is part of the way through making a good jazz record. Is sort of knowing where to walk within that sort of bass melody that goes up and down and all over the place, is and knowing how to again bend those rules is a way to make music that still has some sort of melody and some ear appealing thing to it, but that at the same time comes up with something new. So yeah.
Well, you talked about like something that is appealing to the ear. I am a big lover of melody in music, so which is why I'm usually not a fan of like hip hop rap music, because it tends to lack melody. So I'm not the person to talk about that, but that's primarily why I don't like it. I also don't like it because a lot of times the words that they say, they rap about, seem very misogynistic and kind of like gangster-like. So I can't relate to that. But if I think about the music that I really love and the musicians that I really love, like when I was in high school, I was crazy about the American band Van Halen, the original version, right? The other versions I don't care for, but anyway, like Van Halen was kind of well known for a lot of those albums. They just went in and they just recorded all together. Like it wasn't all separated out, and they had a very fast pace. So you kind of get into a groove, right? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. They're very David Lee Roth is the epitome of the confident rock star, for example, and actually Eddie Van Halen was a guitarist of that band. Similar kind of thing. Like they were very uninhibited people. Yes, yes. Unfortunately, this can come off like they never would have survived in the business world. Like I'm saying Roth or Van Halen because kind of like there's some tension, but they were not afraid to push the envelope, and they get in a certain groove ultimately. But very productive, very prolific people. So I want us as a society to be freer. As many of you out there know. I lived in Japan a long time, and I'm very fond of Japan, but it is far from perfect. And one of the ways in which I've long thought Japan could be much more successful, not that I'm suggesting that they go towards, say, the American way or even the Canadian way of super individualistic and like too few rules, but they're too rule bound in those societies, like those homogeneous rule bound societies like South Korea or China or Japan in particular. I think that's holding them back big time. And that's not, they haven't made huge contributions to creativity, but there's something to be said for both. But the biggest, I was just reading recently, K-pop Demon Hunters
Yes.
is an animated movie, animated musical, really, right, on Netflix. It's their most popular English show ever. You know, the songs off them went to like number one, number two on the charts, and you know, I was so interested to find out who was behind this. And this woman, Kang is her last name. I can't remember her first name, but she's from Toronto. So
Oh wow.
she came here from South Korea when she was 5. So that's an interesting meld of cultural ideas, I'm sure. Like, you know, Koreans, from my experience, typically they're extremely hardworking, bright, highly educated people, right? Really
Mm-hmm.
very diligent. But, you know, that tends to not be the best environment for, you know, true innovative, inventive creativity. But, you know, she grew up in a very cosmopolitan, Toronto is arguably the most cosmopolitan city in the world. There are more languages spoken on the streets of Toronto than any other place in the world, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
she
Mm-hmm.
exposed all these different ideas and the overarching kind of culture of individualism of Canada and the West. So what an interesting mixture. So she's obviously a genius, right?
Yeah.
Whereas I think, frankly speaking, you know, had she stayed in career her whole life, it would have been harder to be like that. She would be an outlier anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
And
it,
actually, the interesting thing about K-pop is that it was turned down by other. I'm not sure if it was other streaming services or turned down for, from one of the major studios, and then Netflix picked it up, and then it's a runaway hit kind of thing. So,
it is.
um,
It's very good. I've watched most of it. My wife and I, who is Korean by the way, and been intermittently watching it. It's terrific. Like, you know, it's not something that I would typically think to go after. Well, especially after I told you I like Van Halen. I like Van Halen, but I also like a lot of jazz. I like that kind of stuff. So, you know, at one point we're going to have some musicians on,
mm,
and you know, maybe we'll get my old bandmate on, who my bass player, who I'm looking forward to seeing in Paris next month. That'll be a hoot. Um, but yeah, like carrying on with this creativity, what else? What else can we do, Trevor? Like, because I
yeah,
think it's really interesting coming from you, and tell me if I'm completely off base here, but because I come from a family of engineers, and you know, you have an engineering
mm-hmm,
PhD from MIT, no less. So, you know, in my experience, a lot of times engineers are you know, you're necessarily highly analytical and, you know, deep in thought analyzing stuff, right?
right.
But then, you know, if you're creating something anew, if you're a scientist or if you're an engineer, maybe more so if you're a scientist, but I guess you're also a scientist in a way, right? But, you know, you have the scientific method, you have to have the hypothesis, right? You
Yes,
have to have
yes.
an idea. So I want you to expound on that a bit, if you would. Like,
Yeah, yeah. No, I think there's a lot of room for creativity even in a field such as engineering. Where maybe you're building a particular design for a plant, and you have to fit a bunch of components into a limited space, and then and then you've got to get all of the flows right and everything working right correctly, and sometimes it does take a bit of lateral thinking, to sort of think outside of the box of like, well, how do we actually solve this? And I mean, engineering is all about problem solving, really. So I would say, like even though I don't do kind of the traditional engineering that I trained on in an undergraduate in terms of like figuring out flows between different um, um, you know different mixing units and all figuring out the thermodynamics of how the heat exchanger is working, everything else. Even though I don't use those things, I still use kind of the creative problem solving, kind of ethos and thinking that went into, well, how do we solve a problem that is posed to us in a creative way by coming up with different iterations on designs. I think, I mean, my kid just had an engineering class that he's working on today, and it reminded me of one that I took in high school. That was fantastic, and was taught by the machine shop teacher. And it was just amazing because like it was just, here's some cardboard, come up with build a boat out of cardboard that will survive one length of the pool. and And my friend and I did it by sort of like constructing the innards and then painting it like six or seven times, and it was this like sort of surfboard thing, and it worked fantastically. Other people just like used a bunch of shrink wrap around a couple of hollow tubes, and got the same result kind of thing. And then I was telling my son about we had to build a tower out of pasta and see what would hold the most weight. And mine was sort of like spaghetti inside or pasta and straws. So I had spaghetti inside some straws in this sort of like cube, and then the way it failed is that it sort of twisted in on itself and collapsed because it didn't have enough cross braces. And the guy that won was just 3 sticks of ziti, sort of super glued together with little cross braces of ziti, and it held so much weight that like I think we ended up using all of the weights, like that we had from the weightlifting room, and it still didn't fail. So then the shop teacher had to like smack on the top with a hammer, and it finally sort of failed by kind of exploding. So,
Yeah. So I don't remember, what is CD?
ziti is just like the round, the hollow tubes, like penny pasta is sort of like the short version of it. But it was just a round hollow tube of pasta, of uncooked pasta that was just rigid and just lasted. So if you ever need to build,
it's there's probably a lot there we could explore, but
yeah,
I think some of that creativity, even in those examples, although like the stakes are not that high, but there's a risk, right? There's a risk of embarrassment, right? If you choose
exactly
the wrong kind of thing to build, that it's going to utterly fail, and that you might be a bit embarrassed. But one of the ways in which I think people become smarter and more creative and learn more, I think this is very important, and I'm kind of known for this, not being afraid to ask questions or just throw out ideas that I am pretty sure, a high percentage of which would be pretty ridiculous. But like, there's often brilliance in the ridiculousness. So you really need to shed that idea. Like, if you're on a Zoom call with someone and you're talking about ideas and you've got this idea, but you think, how's it going to be received? Fuck it. Just say it, right? And then even if the idea is crap, it might lead to something somewhere. And, this catalyzes thought. I really love the idea that you said that your friend makes regular time that they block out an hour to think. It, strangely enough, and you don't know how these things are going to go together. But as you were telling us that before, I was thinking of the former Prime Minister of Canada, still a beloved Prime Minister across the spectrum largely, not everyone, but Jean Chrétien. And Jean Chrétien, I'll never forget. I don't know where I read this, but I'm careful with my sources, and so it was a credible source. It would have been, but he would take, again, similarly through his day, he would take that time. He would set it aside. I don't know how much of that was creative thinking per se, but thinking of just to think, because we're inundated with so many things in our lives, like our personal and family responsibilities, our work responsibilities, business responsibilities, the messaging from a million channels on, in a million formats. And so just taking time to relax, whether it's to go for a walk or you have that time where you sit, protect some time where you think. I think people don't, it sounds counterintuitive because our minds are going all the time, but people are not taking time to actually think as much as, say, a few decades ago. I really don't think so.
Yeah, and I mean, it's not only think, but maybe have a journal, have something in front of you that you can jot down notes. Because I think it's not only kind of doing that thinking, but it's also trying to capture some of those ideas kind of before they go. And I think I always walk around with a little notepad on me, just in case something comes up of like, oh well, what about this, and so that I can capture it. Because I think definitely having and even setting up a system that where you can do that, where you can have an ability to kind of capture ideas, even ones that are crazy. I mean, I think I will often hedge my bets when I'm speaking in a group of like, maybe this is a crazy idea, but which is
that is one way to protect yourself and still allow the idea to come out. Like, you're caught to the fact that it may be crazy, so say it, right? Okay, whatever, whatever gets you through. But I'm sure we've all been there where, yes, we were a bit reticent to say an idea because you thought, well, maybe this will be poorly received, maybe it's kind of dumb, and then people are like, I fucking love that idea. There was one recently in our kind of like our Ivy Plus organization group for all like Ivy Plus schools, and you had added me to this WhatsApp group, and it was like planning for the holiday party, and I had some thoughts about that, which related to like, everyone's trying all these expensive places. Like, well, I did think at the time, like, maybe this is a bit nuts, but like some ideas around doing it in an artist gallery and then getting them to donate, and we get sponsors and stuff. I'm like, sometimes, especially when you're in those rooms, like, it's filled with physically or virtually with people who are like alumni from the likes of Yale and Harvard and MIT and Oxford and all those kind of people. Sometimes those people are not good critics, meaning they're critical. But I like, again, I just think you just got to do it. And you'll often be pleasantly surprised. You'll often be pleasantly surprised that the people you thought would have been very critical of something are very open to it. So I think it's important. Another thing about creativity, I really try to live my life to a large extent by this, and I really believe this. It's the old Roman saying. I can't recall the Latin itself, but like, fortune favors the bold.
Yep.
Right? Sometimes says fortune favors the brave, but like, bold ideas win, particularly amid the
Virgil. Yes.
Yeah, like, you got to break through. Like, for years, people know this about me. Like, I'm very good, like, in a business development. When I do my business development role, trying to look for new partners, like strategic partners or capital partners, even like trying to raise money for people or try to get new clients. And I'm reaching out. People don't know, like, let's just send mass emails or in-mails or this kind of stuff, or like, just call. Well, that's fine. You can still do that, but I'm a big believer in sending dimensional mail. That alone is kind of bold. It's like, what the hell are you doing? Like, you're doing things, you're sending snail mail to people, and then I will do dimensional mail. And one of my go-tos is like mailing a pair of socks to somebody and essentially saying, if you promise to, if you meet with us, I promise to knock your socks off, and here are the reasons why you want to meet with the firm. So those kinds of things, they break through. You have to break through. And I don't think AI is going to come up with those ideas. It might rehash some things. So I guess it's a lazy way, but like, I think we're going to short circuit ourselves if we rely on AI too much. I think we're midstream figuring out how to use it. And I don't know the answers either. I am also concerned, like everybody else, like especially for the younger generations. What does it mean? What does it mean when AI can do the jobs of, accountants and lawyers and even doctors to a large extent? So do we become redundant? Well, no, I think our jobs are going to have to necessarily change, but we're all going to have to up our game, right? Like, I don't know. I think a world that's run by avaristic, people with questionable ethics, like Sam Altman, who's the leader of OpenAI, who does ChatGPT and Sora and all that. We're going to have to up our game. And on that note, it's just been a day or two since he announced that, okay, now it's okay. Even though we were so concerned about people's mental health and whatnot and coming off as good corporate citizens, and yes, we're a nonprofit. Now OpenAI and Sam Altman has come out and said, oh, we're going to allow people to make pornography with AI. Like, really? Yeah. I don't know. I don't see how this is being a good thing. But anyway, all these influences, these things are going to happen anyway. I guess that's the point I'm trying to make. And so how can we wend our way through them and how can humans stay competitive? At one point, I'd love to get Jeffrey Hinton on, who's the godfather of AI, right? We're fortunate to have him here in Toronto. I think you have met him, have you not? Or
a
people?
A few times, yes, at various speaking engagements. And
let's get him on. I think I think he plays an important role, like a cautionary role for AI, but at the same time, I think he may be a little bit too negative. Like, I want to have solutions for how we can deal with this. It's like, okay, you're negative. I get it. But just telling people like Sam Altman who are making billions off of AI to be more responsible is probably not going to work. So how can we empower other people as individuals to take charge, knowing that we're faced with the onslaught of AI? How do
Mm-hmm.
does food have a role here? There's a left turn. Um, so can you be more or less creative depending upon what you eat and what you like? Are there any real lessons in reality for how we deal with AI and become more
Well,
creative?
I think getting one element of creativity is sort of the willingness to embrace kind of new and different ideas, and if that means maybe getting outside of your typical routine and trying something new or even trying a new recipe,
Right.
sometimes that's a way to go about it, and oftentimes even making food can be quite a creative experience,
Oh, I love it. I
and
love to cook.
yeah,
And it's
yeah,
not so much about the end result of the food. Here's why I love cooking, and I totally encourage people, and I agree with what you said, why you should cook is I almost never read from a recipe. So it's a very creative thing. I deal with what I have in the fridge and the cupboard. So necessity is the mother of invention. It forces you to be creative. I try to teach my son this, in the day and age where you can get a recipe just by speaking to your phone. I don't do that. It's like Thanksgiving. Like it's like, okay, how do I cook a turkey? I need to know how to do that. But yeah, go outside your routine. You just kind of do that. I was going to say a little on that point. Very important point. I think you made, Trevor, is to be more creative. Go outside your typical routine. Eat
yes,
something different. Make something different. Do something different. Say something different. Um, but one of the things I occasionally do, and now that I'm saying it, I want to do it again today every once in a while because our hands are so there's so many sensory receptors in our hands, our fingers, and goes up to our brain. And most people are not truly ambidextrous, right? They have a dominant hand. I'm right-handed. Every once in a while, it will be days when I specifically use my left hand.
hmm.
And this is probably stimulate. I'm not a neuroscientist, but I believe this is stimulating different pathways in my brain. So that's out of your routine, right?
Yeah,
Just start
but
using your non-dominant hand once in a while.
yeah, yeah.
You ever do that?
I not as much as I probably should try, but yeah,
I'm I'm
but
convinced. I'm convinced it catalyzes some new thinking in me.
mhm,
Yeah,
mhm.
maybe someone can leave in the comments at some point, like whether there's any actually research to give evidence to what I'm just saying. But
Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
But and I think it's also like you need to there's an element of creativity of creating a kind of safe space to make mistakes, to do things and not feel like you're going to be criticized for them, and then and that safety can take many aspects to it. I mean, you want to make sure that, of course, as with anything, you've had enough sleep, you've eaten, have a good sort of foundation from which to sit down and work on challenging things. And the other element of it is challenge. So I think
right.
I took a course in flow, and how to get yourself into a creative kind of flow state where you're just working and you're lost, you lose track of time, and you're just kind of doing what you want to do, and there's an element of getting into a flow state of where you've got to face something that's a challenge, right? And it can't be sort of an overwhelming challenge. It has to be sort of a manageable challenge, but something that challenges you to sort of push back, and that's what initiates the flow state. But then also there's an element of flow that's recovery. So you need to understand that you can't always be on and coming up with all of this stuff. You need to give yourself time to recover. And I certainly noticed this after big conferences. Like there was a big conference last week, even though it was in town. I had to sort of catch up on sleep and kind of give myself some quiet time after that to kind of recoup and re-energize. Just because it's sort of like you're walking around, you're making introductions, you're pitching your startup 10, 30 different times in an afternoon, and that drains energy, and so you need to be aware of kind of where you are, in your state of mind, and like some self-awareness of knowing that, okay, maybe now isn't necessarily the time to sort of tackle that hard creative thing. Maybe I just need to take sort of a bit of time and relax, and then before
go to the pool, go to the hot tub, you'll relax. There are different wavelengths that your brain runs on.
Yes,
which is why when people are in the shower or when they get up first in the morning, I often have great ideas early in the morning. Make sure you capture them. You need downtime. I was just going to add to that, like, so much of what we've seen in the last 5 or 10 years, particularly in things like the startup world, right? You see hustle culture, and you see these influencers who are real, proponents of this sort of thing. And I think that's really counterproductive. Hustling all the time, and especially in the age of increasing automation and AI, I think it's not going to work. You're not going to be able to outwork that, right? So you need to take Trevor's advice here. You need the downtime. You need your sleep. You need to eat right. If you don't have the right nutrients, literally your brain's not going to be firing all the nerve cells properly. You're going to be pretty dull. We know that the right food and exercise actually makes you smarter. We know this. Exposure to sunlight, again, back to your thing, a walk. We probably don't know exactly why that works. Some of it's circadian rhythm, and you're getting in again to rhythm. The brain and the body work on cycles off and on, right? It's not this hustle culture BS. I think it's BS. I don't mean by this to say, don't work reasonably hard, but like, don't exhaust yourself. What's the point of that? And if you're stuck in a job where it's always like that, leave.
Oh yeah.
That's not doing the company any good, and it's certainly not doing you any good. But anything we say now, I think in 5 years' time, it's going to be double.
No, absolutely.
What about environment? What about surrounding yourself with the right people as a way toward becoming more creative? What do you suggest about that?
Yeah, well, I think it helps, like I said, to sort of either suspend the criticism or kind of yes and, right? Another great source of creativity is you think of improv comedians, right? And the whole concept in improv is one of yes and. You don't say no to something that someone just said. You yes and it. You say yes. I saw a chicken walking across on the back of a donkey. Yes, and the chicken was singing Shakespeare or singing. So,
here's a quick one. Here's a quick one for you. Okay, see how you respond. Why did the chicken cross the road?
Why?
Well, I don't know. I'm just making up. And maybe he saw it. He was walking down the road and he saw Chick-fil-A, and he's like, I'm gonna go over there. That's entirely stupid. Yeah. But I think who you surround yourself.
The creative process in
there's a failure as an example.
Demonstrated, yes.
Well, maybe somebody laughs, so it's not a failure. But I think boldness, ideas. In creating environment, I think you want to be around people that are disruptors to some degree, rather than disruptive. Some people who have a sense of humor, like, if you go in and you surround yourself in a room full of like analytical geniuses who are just going to be, there's going to be, that's not a recipe for creativity. You need some outliers. You need some dark horses or whatever, that wild cards. So, maybe it's a good idea to have a kind of, if not formally, informal, kind of a group. I can't remember what the word is for it, but that group of people that you can talk to. And I also think, don't just hang out with people who are like you.
Yes, yes,
Super
yes.
important. Like people who are older, younger. This is why I think companies that tech companies are guilty of this a lot. Silicon Valley's fed us this BS for years. That's like, okay, to be a successful startup, you have to be all like, under 25 and just throw some stuff at them and they'll begin the hustle culture again. That's utter nonsense. And it's been disproven.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, the most successful companies are started by people who are like over 45. But I would argue again, even more successful will be a mixture of young and old from the true importance of diversity, right? Not
Yes.
to get the DEI stuff per se, because like I'm also a believer in meritocracy, but I do think drawing inspiration from a variety of different sources and people have different experiences and they can come from things in different angles, that will catalyze a lot of genius thinking. So hang out with young people, especially children, because children have not become, they've not absorbed all these rules yet. Like they color outside the lines. You said, think outside of the box. Well, I like to think outside of the triangle. Why even a box? Fuck, why is it think outside of the box? Think outside of the spirit.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's ultra important.
Mm-hmm.
And do different stuff, just almost for the sake of doing something different. Like, hey, maybe I'll do this next time on our net podcast. Like, part your hair the other way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Or, go. I used to have purple hair. Years ago when I was in Tokyo for a while, I had purple hair. And that was really a spontaneous thing. Be spontaneous, very important.
Yep.
Develop a sense of spontaneity and realize that, at the end of the day, you're probably going to be still alive. What's the worst that can happen?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. No, and I think I've changed over time where I used to be very deliberative about each decision that I made. And over time, I've sort of realized that, okay, well, you can trust your gut. You can kind of just go with the first thing that pops into your head, because oftentimes, even the deliberative process, you've already made that decision in the first 5 seconds, and your brain is just coming up with, like, your logical brain is coming up with reasons for why your sort of emotional brain made that decision in the first place. I think there's a book called The Master and His Emissary that's all about this kind of thing of your brain is sort of an elephant stomping around with like a monkey on the back, sort of trying to wheel it in certain directions, and the elephant is your sort of emotional, intuitive brain, and the monkey is the logical brain, sort of trying to steer it in the right direction. So so realizing that, okay, like I am there's something to be said for a gut instinct, and oftentimes when you meet someone for the first time, you'll get this sort of gut instinct of like, oh, okay, and more often than not, like your gut instinct is right, and so it's useful to kind of tap into your ability to sort of make these instinctual decisions and try to use that a bit more. Maybe not all the time, not for maybe super important decisions, but like, start out slow and then you can grow, and oftentimes you'll save a lot of time over sort of like, well, maybe shouldn't I, you can fill in the gaps. And I heard a great thing that I wanted to say, is that someone said once, creativity is a random walk in a highly confined space. So
why highly confined?
Because, well, or not, maybe highly in a constrained space. So like, the constraints again on jazz is that it has to, like, if there's two notes that are too wildly disjointed, it's going to come off as jarring. So there's some, there are again some rules that limit the universe of like beautiful melodies from the universe of disjoint sounds, but then within that you still can you can still randomly walk within that space to come up with new things that weren't done before.
Yeah, because otherwise we'd be still stuck in the 50s with jazz, some of which is great, like Chet Baker and all those guys, but we wouldn't have acid jazz. We have, some of this, even though, notwithstanding what I said earlier, that I tend not to be a fan of rap and all that, some of it where it's a fusion, I've heard rap with jazz or rap with rock. Why not have a Van Halen like guitar solo in the middle of a jazz piece? Like, what the hell? Like, so what?
And, yeah, and I mean, I really I like certain elements of rap, but the things I really like about it is the wordplay, is the sort of coming kind of the flow of the jazz itself, of the rap itself. So there's elements to kind of enjoy.
Like old school rap, like when it first came out of the for want of a better word, the ghettos, the underprivileged areas of New York City, and I believe a lot of times people were outside and in the cold. I saw this image of you have an old garbage can and there's a fire and they're standing around and they're rapping, and it had more meaning then, right? Because rap became, in the lyrics, a reflection of their reality, and it was kind of protest music. It was kind of like African American style answer to say British punk rock, like that came out of the Thatcher era and all that, the irony stuff, and a lot of that kind of was very harmful to England, frankly. I think that was the American version. And you had bands like Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five and White Line. I love that kind of stuff. Or even the Beastie Boys, again, out of New York. Like, I love that kind of stuff. But in general, I don't like it, and I think it's become a negative force. But let's talk about music for a second, creativity in music, because a lot of people criticize modern music as very formulaic or kind of lacks soul. A lot of musicians today, and I think part of this came about when MTV in the US and Much Music in Canada, like video, came out. Like, if you ever listen to
killed the radio star.
Musicians from long ago, the song, and then finally now you might look up on YouTube and you're like, I love that bit. Wow, that's what they look like? Well, those people that look like that would not make it today. Like, you have to have a nice flat stomach and, you need to look sexy. No shade on Taylor Swift, because I think she is quite talented. But a lot of the musicians today, the knock on them has been like, a lot of them don't even play their own instruments. I know Taylor played piano, so she's an outlier. But you're not going to get the Van Halens. It's not going to happen. You're not going to get Nirvanas today. Do you have a couple of?
And I mean, there's a lot of artists nowadays that are fighting for, even sort of health benefits. Well, certainly in the States, like, what do you do if you're a starving artist kind of thing, and
right.
you have some medical issue, So there's a lot of artists that are kind of taking a stand and saying, look, we need some form of at least benefits or security for young artists that are just starting out, or else we're not going to have good artists emerging, or the ones that emerge are going to be the ones that are have sort of a family that can support them while they're trying out these creative,
or they have another job,
endeavors, or they
like they're a plumber. Plumber by day and musical genius by evening. I'm concerned about this, because I think it's a bit of a microcosm for the rest of society and the challenges we have with technology, and not just the technology itself, but sort of the corporate culture surrounding tech companies, right? And the fact that we've allowed runaway commentary on social media, so like the likes of Facebook and of course we have Spotify and Deezer and all those. You can get anything, and so the artists are not getting paid much by that. And unless you become really famous, you're not going to make much money. And so you used to be able to make a living as a musician, even if you weren't famous, right? That's cool. So I don't know the answer to that, but I do know that we're all going to have to become more creative. Maybe it's more creative across different occupations. Like, I think in the future, I think necessarily a much higher proportion of us, meaning working age people, will be forced into entrepreneurship of some sort, right?
Yeah.
And this is going to be a necessity. I think that old large corporate model is going away.
Yeah.
And this is going to require reinvention all the time, being truly creative. I don't think it's something that AI can really provide, right? I don't know. Well,
Mm.
I want to say something important here, and that relates to creativity. And your T-shirt's a good example. You want to show
Yes. It's
land,
my brother loves sending me like these T-shirts, and this is a land seahorse. So
right? So that's kind of like, I think of that as it's kind of another way of saying you're a fish out of water. You're a horse out of water.
horse out of water. Yes, yes.
Well, tell us about your brother. He seems to have a sense of humor and
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, he's also amazing. So he's always been sort of on the artsy side. Like he was drawing all through high school, and then when he was trying to decide which degree program to go into, he happened upon this thing called medical illustration, and so.
Oh,
Yeah, and so then he, got trained in a lot of learning about anatomy in the human body, as well as artistic illustration and different sorts of elements, and he still does that. So he's, right. I think right now he's sort of working for an insurance company and developing these sort of training materials for them, but.
yeah.
In the past, he's done other sorts of things with in medical legal work, and then even working in sort of the graphic arts department of a kind of a hospital or a teaching hospital that had a lot of different people that were using the graphic arts department for help with like making figures and that sort of stuff for papers and things and books.
Cool.
So,
I seem to recall, we have a friend in common, GA. GA. GA, who's this super smart woman. She has she has a PhD from the Sorbonne in Paris in what is it? Something related to medical science, and then she's been working in AI too. But I believe her husband is a medical illustrator as well.
okay.
So I don't know. Where's your brother? Is he in Toronto or is he
No,
elsewhere?
no. So, I mean, we grew up in Buffalo, New York, and then he went to school at RIT in Rochester, and then now he's living in Texas with his family.
Oh,
So,
okay. All
yeah,
right.
yeah.
Okay. So what do we want to leave folks with today? So again, like, if you have any specific tips for how we can all fight back against, this generative AI and how it's really kind of stealing a lot of the creative jobs away from us, like how can we fight back against that? So audience members, I encourage you, if you have those ideas, to put them in there. And once again, if you're super critical, we're going to delete your comments. So don't even go there. But we would love you, to come and visit us again. Thank you for today. And let's do something creative just before we go. So let's do this. Let's play a little game, Trevor.
Sure.
I'm going to say a word, then you say a word, and we'll go back and forth a few times. And then let's see if we can come up with some kind of cogent thing out of that. So Volkswagen.
Beetle. What's that?
Mountain.
Mountain. Let's see. Snow-capped.
Catholic priest. I say this because I met a Catholic priest the other day at this event, so it's in my head.
Neuroscientist.
Okay. So what do you get when, what happens when, no, let's start over again. Okay. A Catholic priest and a neuroscientist at the top of a mountain walk into the chalet. What happens? Dot. Okay, we'll leave it there, audience. If you care to finish the story, the joke, we would love to read that. But thank you again for being with us on High Octane Friends, Trevor. And we've got some exciting guests coming up in some future episodes. So check that out, and it's Friday here in Toronto when we're recording this. So have a good weekend, or if you're watching after, which you will, I hope you've had a good weekend. A little bit of a time shift there. Bye, folks.